Cool. I'm ready for that. Actually, let me close the door real quick. Now I'm ready. Okay.
All right. Hey everyone. I think we're broadcasting now. This is the Critical Distance fundraising stream. It's the final day and a bit of our 2016 fundraiser. We are trying to bring in money so that we can do more things with in more different media to highlight critical thinking on video games. And right now I've got on the line Amy Dentata, who's done a lot of really great stuff in the scene, has been making independent video games for a few years now, and over the past year has been making a series of videos called Let's Walk, which I've been really excited by, and I'm really thrilled to talk with you about it. Hi Amy.
Hello.
So I'm just going to start this video playing in the background. Could you tell us a bit about, I guess, how you got started with game development first?
Well, I kind of have one of those typical stories of I've always wanted to make video games since I was a little kid, that whole deal. That's definitely been my thing. I was a gamer since I was real little, playing like the original Legend of Zelda on the NES. And like a lot of kids do like imagination play and stuff like that. And for me, it was just imagining new things for video games. And so yeah, it's just kind of just always been an interest of mine. Cool.
And could you say a little bit about those games that you started making early on?
I think it was around like 2010 that I started like feeling like I was good enough coding to actually just make stuff on my own, go past like just designing stuff and actually just code and release it. And so I started playing around in Unity, teaching myself the quote-unquote JavaScript that's in Unity. And now I'm teaching myself C# and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, so my first couple of games were just really just experimenting and learning how Unity works. I was doing game jams, like Ludum Dare is pretty awesome. Ludum Dare, however you want to say it.
I've never been sure.
And so I've been doing that. The 48-hour game jams are a pretty great way to get used to the idea of making something and finishing it and putting it out for people to see.
Yeah, fantastic. So what gave you the idea for the Let's Walk video series?
Well, actually, like, I actually spend a lot of time playing games like that on my own. Like, that's kind of a thing that I've always done, is just, like, stop to smell the roses, stop to look at the scenery in games. Because, like, a lot of games like Call of Duty and all that, they have these gorgeous environments, and if you're actually playing the game, you never notice half the stuff that's in these levels. And that really bothered me, that so much work goes into producing all this stuff, but no work goes into appreciating it at all. Like the biggest chunk of video game development budget in AAA is art production, and they've got like armies of artists producing all these assets. Then everybody just runs around at top speed shooting things and I feel like it goes to waste. So I like to just chill out, sit back and soak it in, like just be there as if I was just hanging out in a real place. Like if you're hanging out in a park, you're like, oh, it's so lovely here. So I hang out in video games like I'm hanging out in a park. And then after a while, I realized that it would probably work pretty cool if I recorded that and started talking about it, especially as a nice counterpoint to all of the really aggressive, angry gamer kind of content that's on YouTube. I saw a lot of that stuff and I didn't see a lot of anything on the other end of the spectrum, and I was like, we need some balance here. So I figured it'd be a nice counterbalance to record some really chill stuff like that.
Yeah, and definitely part of why it appeals to me so much is because it's so chill. And
yeah.
And generally I'm excited about anything that people do with video games that brings things into a more chill tenor. But one of the things that's interested me about Let's Walk is also the way that you talk to the audience about the sensation of trying to make the character walk and how that varies from game to game. I wonder if you could say a little bit about that.
Well, different games have different controller sensitivities and different models for how you move. Like a lot of the Bethesda games, it's just a really gentle, just ramping up of basically just a linear scale. You push harder on the joystick, you move faster. And then there's games like Mirror's Edge, where if you push the joystick a little bit, you do a tiny little tiptoe, really slow, and then you just bust into a full-on sprint. So there's this tiny little range there. And sometimes I can adjust that by like editing INI files and tweaking how it works. Other times I have to do it manually. I just have to really finesse the controller to get things to work right so that I'm actually moving at a decent pace.
It didn't occur to me that you would sometimes be editing the INI files. That's interesting.
I do that. Sometimes I use trainers and cheats, stuff like that, just to get the right experience. It's one of the things that I find kind of interesting about, like, to do the videos that I do, I kind of have to fight the game a bit. I'm always pushed, and I'm always in a little bit in conflict with the game, because it wants to put all these things on the screen. It wants to, dazzle me with objective markers and all this other stuff and tons of things to do and explosions everywhere. And I'm trying to shut that all down, get it to just calm down and just chill out for a minute. And some games are harder to get to that point than others.
Yeah. So the INI files, is that kind of the file in the game that stores sort of information about how different bits of the game world function?
Yeah, and it's different. I mean, different games work different ways. Some games, they have like so much stuff exposed, just plain text in the INI file, so you can just open it up in Notepad and edit things yourself. With other things, you have to use trainers. You have to actually fiddle with, like, you have to dig around in memory to figure out where stuff is stored to modify it.
Right. Cool.
But yeah, I love the games where everything's exposed in plain text, because then I can just tweak it, and it's so lovely.
Yeah. It is fascinating to think about how this very pared back, simple, kind of more minimalist approach to playing the game requires often such an intense
it requires more technical expertise than I would have assumed.
Yeah.
Just even myself going into it, I'm like, I'm very glad that I'm a total nerd and I know how to do all this stuff. Because otherwise, with some of the games that even just the ones I've recorded so far, it wouldn't be possible at all.
Yeah. So. Yeah, you wouldn't expect that it's such a major intervention, and it like you say, it requires skill. And I don't think that's the first thing people would think of when they sort of look at a video of someone walking very slowly, because they think of it as inactivity. And so that doesn't look like something that requires skill, but it actually requires a very high level of skill, more so than just sort of playing a game competently.
Yeah, I'm not just button mashing or I'm not like joystick mashing and just go forward. There's a lot of fine tuning. But hopefully the end result is that it looks really easy, and then it's totally, and that it's no work at all. Granted, the games where I can modify the max walking speed, then I can totally just jam forward and do less work, but I can't do that all the time. So
cool. So what are the kind of surprises that you uncover when you play games this way?
There's a lot of stuff that you kind of expect to find, like hidden Easter eggs, things like that. And then there's also a lot of times just tiny little details, like if a game has post-it notes somewhere. In some games, if you get to high enough texture resolution going, there will be stuff written on the post-it notes. And if depending on how they did the art pipeline, sometimes you can just check around and read that stuff. And it's usually repeated everywhere, right? Because they repeat the same textures over and over. But somebody went through the work of making that fake post-it note and putting it on a texture, and you definitely wouldn't notice that if you're just running around guns blazing.
Yeah. Has it ever changed your reading of what's going on narratively in a game?
I kind of, when I do this sort of stuff, I kind of, my goal is to kind of create a different narrative and to try to see a different way to approach the game than the way it wants you to see it. Because when you step outside of that, you can usually see that most games, like most AAA games especially, they're usually just going for fun. They're not going for that much depth. It's just entertaining, and it's kind of schlocky sci-fi fantasy writing and all that. And there's not usually that much emotional range, with only there's always a couple standout exceptions. The Last of Us had some emotional scenes, things like that. But most of the time, the emotional range is pretty limited in the game itself. But I found that when I turn the gameplay off and all of the stuff that jumps in your face, there's a lot more emotional range hiding right under the surface.
That's
that
really interesting. Could you give an example?
there's a lot of scenes in Fallout 4 where there's a lot of grandeur in that game. There's these huge buildings, there's you can see really far, and there's fog. Sometimes there's battles happening in the distance. And that kind of feeling of this immensity of this like ruined city. In my experience, when I'm playing the game regularly, I never really feel that because the game doesn't give me time to feel it. It's, rush off to your next quest line and not just like, dude, this city is ruined. Check it out. Like, bad stuff happened here.
Yeah.
It's all around us. Like, can you see that? Can you feel that? And really let it like sit with you what that means. They don't let you sit with that and think about what it means. Most of these games are kind of like I don't know, like a poorly edited film where they're trying to get a certain emotional reaction out of the viewer, but they don't give it enough time to happen because you have to let there be space.
Yeah.
For feelings to happen, and most games do not allow any space for feelings to happen.
Right. That's an interesting parallel. I've just recently been watching all the videos on Everything We're Painting on YouTube again.
I love that channel.
Right, and that's a major argument on that channel, right? That shots should be held for longer, and nowadays, films tend to be cut so that it's like lots of little shots, and you don't get to sit with a feeling. You don't get to really appreciate movement that's happening. Even if someone's being punched in the face, you don't get to see them get punched in the face.
Yeah, there's like 3 cuts for a punch.
Yeah.
And a lot of the like video games don't necessarily they don't use cuts that much, but it's still like your attention gets cut all the time because there's always pop-ups on the screen and always things, go do this, go do that. So it's like your attention, your ability to pay attention to stuff gets cut up like that.
Right.
Without there being a visual cut.
Do you think that makes Let's Walks taxing in a particular way then? If you're having to constantly pay the same amount of attention, do you find that it's a different kind of mental taxing that it requires?
It is, and that's one of the reasons why the videos that I do for that are usually around an hour long, or maybe 45 minutes to an hour long, because it actually takes time to get into this mental space that I want to get people into. It takes a while. Like for me, even as I'm recording it, it takes me a while to fall into that space where I'm like, I don't need to hurry up. I don't need to go accomplish things. We're just gonna take our time, and it's okay. It's okay to take our time. It's okay. It takes a while to feel that way. So I go for like 45 minutes to an hour because usually the first 15 to 20 minutes of that are just getting in the zone. Both me and the person that's watching, if they're actually like trying to get into the zone, because you could probably just space out if you wanted to completely.
Right.
It's kind of like, it's a little bit like the ASMR of Let's Plays, so.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely, and there is like a genre of ASMR Let's Plays, right? Like the people who do ASMR Skyrim videos.
I think so. I found out about that after I started doing my videos.
Right.
I mean, granted, I'm not actually trying for that kind of tack, but yeah.
Yeah. It's a different kind of promise, right? Like, so what you're doing could give someone that ASMR sort of feeling, but it's actually that you're engaged in a particular kind of inquiry about what's going on in the game.
Yeah, it has a bit of an intellectual element to it as well. And it's kind of just, I think a lot of these video game levels are a great like springboard for the imagination. And so a lot of times when I'm talking, I'll just say stuff as it comes to me, just stuff that whatever I'm walking through, just whatever it brings up in me.
Yeah.
Like when I was walking through Mirror's Edge Catalyst, it made me think a lot about how gentrification has been affecting the San Francisco Bay Area. And like, I don't think anybody on the Mirror's Edge Catalyst team, granted there's some themes in that game about, about the super rich and class division and all that kind of stuff, but I don't think they were like, we're going to make people think about gentrification in San Francisco Bay Area while they're walking through here. But that's where I went when I was going there, and it was a really cool talk.
Yeah, for sure. I know there's been a little bit of discussion since Watch Dogs 2 came out about like how do you talk about gentrification and when does that kind of conversation sort of fail in a video game context, and people have seemed kind of unsure about whether Watch Dogs 2 is making it work or not.
Yeah. I think part of the difficulty there is in Watch Dogs too, because I'm kind of prepping to do a Let's Walk for that right now, which means I have to I don't 100% the games, but I 90% them, get all the main stuff out of the way.
Yeah.
And so I'm playing through that right now. And it's kind of like the way that they approach gentrification in there, it's more like seasoning for the setting than anything that's really front and center. They don't tackle it head on. It's just part of the environmental storytelling, like ambiance around you.
Yeah. Which
I think isn't enough.
What do you think it would take to actually address it properly?
For video games, I think we just need to be less afraid to jump into more human stories, like things that are less about huge conspiracies and all of this kind of really out there kind of storytelling. One of the more recent well-known examples of a more human story was Firewatch, right?
Right.
It's just about some 30-something dude hanging out in the middle of nowhere and dealing with his wife's early onset Alzheimer's, and it's a really human story. It's not, they pull in a little bit of conspiracy stuff, but it's kind of just it's in service of that more human story.
Right.
And I think a lot of these more mainstream AAA games, they kind of do the opposite, where the main drive is the really out there wacky stuff, and then the human stuff is just a little sprinkle here and there for flavor. And I think that formula, I don't think, can do as well a job of addressing more real world kind of stuff. I think it's kind of set up already to kind of not do a good job of that.
Yeah. So is there kind of then a major difference between how something like Firewatch is designed sort of in that walking sim genre, and something like this where it's not designed for walking, but you're reappropriating it as a game where you're primarily walking? Do you find major differences in the way those two games are designed?
Oh yeah, definitely. Most games are just they're ruthlessly efficient distraction machines. There's little things sprinkled around everywhere. Whereas a game like Firewatch is an open world game. It's on the smaller side, but it's an open world game. And there is stuff you can find that is kind of not part of the main story, but you really have to dig for it. The stuff that's that's more like Easter eggs than side quests, right? The game doesn't really have side quests. There is a story, and that your attention is focused completely on that story and moving through it from the beginning to end.
Yeah.
So it's designed trying to focus you on stuff. It's trying to focus you, whereas most mainstream games are trying to kind of just distract you in any random direction, do whatever you want, and there's no focus at all. It's kind of a cliche thing that most of these games are off, especially the open world ones, are hurry up, there's this huge world ending thing happening. But you can take your time. You don't have to hurry up.
Yeah.
And you can just do a bunch of these other little side quest things and forget about it. Whereas, sure, in Firewatch, you can sit back and wait all you want, and it won't necessarily penalize you. But you can't just run off and distract yourself with completely unrelated things in the meantime while you're ignoring the main story. So it's kind of it's pushing your attention towards where it wants.
Yeah. Cool. And you've got this sort of difference between what you're doing, which is deliberately putting your attention to something, and when the game wants to dissipate it, and the walking sim, which is designed to focus your attention.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
Which is why I probably will never do a Let's Walk of Firewatch, because it would be a little redundant. It'd be a little different. But yeah. I like that. I really like that idea of saying, this style of play that's been really maligned. Not only is there value in it, there's so much value in it that all of these big budget games are missing out by not addressing it, not approaching it in any way.
Cool. That's a good argument.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for talking with me about this. It's been really great to get some insight into what's involved in making Let's Walk videos.
It was a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, thank you for taking the time. All right. I'm gonna stop the stream.
Okay.
Okay. Have a good afternoon.
All right, you too. Thanks so much.
Okay. Bye bye.
Bye bye.